listening to the best of the Martha Zoller Show. To hear the full show each day, tune in to AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN or log in to accesswdun.com and click the Listen Live button from 9 to 11 Monday through Friday. Joining me right now with someone that I love talking to, Linda McMahon, has been on the program before. She is a business person. She is a board member of America First Works. And we're going to talk a little bit about the very different tone that was taken by Kamala Harris last week when she was doing her economic rollout. And she made the statement, Donald Trump hates small businesses. So, Linda McMahon, welcome back to the program.
Thanks, Martha. It's good to be with you this morning. Thanks for having me.
So, really, how does somebody who's never had a private sector job in her life say that a man who has done nothing but create jobs his entire life doesn't like small businesses?
Well, I think the really good part is all you really have to do is look at Donald Trump's record, when he was president for 4 years. And it's interesting, when he first talked to me about being the administrator for SBA, excuse me, I have a little bit of a cold this morning, about being the administrator, he said, I've got a novel idea. He said, I'd like to have somebody running the Small Business Administration who's actually created a business, who understands about jobs, who understands about workers' needs, who understands what it means to have to access capital, and how interest rates and taxes and all of that impact the growth of businesses. And he said, I'd really like for you to take that on, and I was, of course, honored to do it. And while I was in that role, I traveled to all 50 states. I went to all 68 district SBA offices. I talked to small businesses all around the country. And when I talked to them and asked them what would be the most meaningful to them to help their businesses grow, the things that they said to me were, well, first of all, we need to have consistency. We need to know what tax policy is going to be. We would love to see taxes cut because we want to put that money in our pockets. We would like to get out from under the regulatory burdens that plague small businesses because, we don't have a battery of lawyers and accountants, to follow all of these regulations and to make sure we're complying. And the thing that would just make the most difference to us is knowing what the tax structure and the regulatory environment is going to be, because then we know that we can invest in our companies and in our businesses. And that's what the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act did for small businesses. And when I would go back and talk to these business owners, and they would tell me that they reinvested the money they saved back into their companies, we saw economic growth. We saw the economy flourish under President Trump. So he used to tell me when I would accompany him on different events when he spoke, and if he was referencing small businesses, he would always acknowledge me in the audience, and he would say, Linda, he said, we always have to remember that small business is really big business because it drives the economy in our country.
Well, and
so how Kamala Harris could say he hates small business, I think she plucked that out of the air.
Well, the most interesting people I have met in my life have been small business people who grew, in many cases, to be big business people. But the thing that they had in common is they, one, weren't afraid to be broke, so they were willing to take risks. And they also didn't let a setback, make them quit. There's everybody that I know that has been in business for any period of time, including me. Okay, I have a number of small businesses my husband and I have had on the side. Most of them have done great, but there have been one or two that have not worked. And that's what you learn from, right? You can't guarantee that everybody's successful all the time. But if you can keep certain things in check, like spending and taxes and regulation, then you can be successful most of the time. I'm sure in your career, Linda, you've had winners and losers, right? But you learned and you move forward.
Absolutely. Well, you can look at the wonderful company that I had the pleasure of helping build World Wrestling Entertainment. But there was a time early on that we went bankrupt and we lost everything. We had to start all over from scratch. And so when I talk to small businesses and I tell them, I say, look, I know what that's like, but I tell them all it's really not how you fall, but it's how you get back up. And what you find with entrepreneurs and small business owners is it's just like what you said. They put their shoulder to the wheel every single day. It is their passion. It is what they do, and they don't give up. And what they need is a hand up. They need not to be burdened with regulation. Do you realize that it's a stunning statistic to me that the Biden-Harris administration added over $1.7 trillion in new regulatory costs and nearly 330 million hours of paperwork to businesses since 2021. Now, that's just outstanding. It's unbelievable that kind of burden could be put on the businesses in our country. And when Kamala Harris now is talking about, that under President Trump, businesses didn't have access to capital. Well, interest rates under President Trump were about 2 to 3%. Look at where they are now under the Harris-Biden administration. So that access to capital, if you can get it, is certainly more costly.
I mean, obviously the situation with COVID caused a big problem, and that's what they like to point to, right? But if our economy had not been as strong as it was going into COVID, with all of the reduction in regulation, the reduction in taxes, the low interest rates, can you imagine how much worse things would have been if we weren't so strong going into that horrible pandemic?
No, and it's really unbelievable that even when the Biden-Harris team took over, inflation was only at about 1.4%. And then when they took things over, it climbed as high as 9%. And, of course, we know today, looking at kitchen table costs of food and gasoline, those costs are really about 20% higher. And it's just making it unaffordable. And, that's what Donald Trump says that he wants to do. Not only does he want America great again and healthy again and safe again, but he wants to make it affordable again. And that's just... I think that's why we see so many voters saying, yeah, that's what I want. I want America to be affordable again.
Amen to that. Linda McMahon, thank you so much for being with us today. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be on.
It's local radio, and that's why you're listening. It's the Martha Zoller Show on AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN.
Monica Crowley is joining me right now. J.D. Vance will be coming to Georgia, and we wanted to chat with her. Monica, it is so great to talk to you. It's been a while.
I know. It's been a minute, Martha. It's so great to be back with you. Thank you for having me.
So, we had a big week where J.D. Vance had a very good performance with the debate. It was actually, I think actually both of them did well in the fact that it was more of a back and forth kind of debate that actually had real discussion about issues, more than what we've seen. And it was reflected by the numbers. I mean, I read that the first reports were around 50 million people watched it live. And then by the time they did downloads and all that sort of thing, roughly 80 million people watched this vice presidential debate, which was comparable to the presidential debate. And I thought that was really extraordinary.
Yes, so did I. I mean, look, you've got a situation here where the person at the top of both tickets, there are a lot of people who have questions on both sides, right, about the number ones. So people were looking to the number two and saying, okay, if I don't feel totally reassured by either one at the top, what does the number two look like? And because everything is so political now, because interest in this election, because this is literally the most important election of our lifetimes, people wanted to see the number twos in action, under pressure, working on the fly, to see whether or not they could handle the top job. And J.D. Vance, of course, passed with flying colors. I was very honored to play a small part in his debate prep. Martha, I played the moderator in his mock debate. So we all wanted to make sure that he was as fully prepared for that debate as possible. And he was. I mean, the truth is J.D. Vance needed very little to no help because he's brilliant. He's been doing a ton of interviews, and he is steeped in policy. And I think you saw that. So what I think is that the clear winner on Tuesday night was J.D. Vance. Tim Walz was civilized. It was a very civilized conversation between the two of them. But J.D. Vance was totally dominant in this conversation. And I think, people who were sitting on the fence might say, okay, now I'm really for Trump Vance. And I think a lot of the polling is starting to bear that out.
Well, one of the things that I liked the most about this, and I've been jumping up and down for several weeks about, is that, we've got our base, okay? And the Democrats have their base to some degree, although some of the trips they're making would indicate that maybe they're still trying to shore up certain parts of their base. But let's just assume at this point in time you've got your base. That what we really need to do is focusing on the roughly 500,000 voters across the country that are going to decide this election. And I really feel like this debate addressed that. I thought J.D. Vance gave thoughtful answers. I think he acknowledged things that were weak points in Republican policy and how we might actually have a conversation about it. And then also Tim Walz was sitting there, in the split screen, did him no favors because all he was doing was nodding positively along with everything J.D. Vance had to say. So I thought from a standpoint of reaching out to the swing states and the swing state voters that this was a big win for voters on that debate stage.
Absolutely. And, one of the most effective things J.D. Vance did, he did two really effective things, Martha. First, he held Tim Walz and Kamala Harris accountable on both of their records. So he, in many ways, he went over the head of Tim Walz, and he went directly to attacking Kamala Harris's catastrophic record on the economy, inflation, energy prices, the no borders policy that has created an absolute cataclysm at the border and then in every state across the union, the collapse of law and order, the collapse of our cities, foreign policy, and an absolute dangerous mess on the precipice of World War III. And then he turned the tables, and he also held Tim Walz accountable for his radical record of, pushing tax hikes and allowing Minneapolis to burn down the ground during the George Floyd riots and pushing for abortion on demand up until the moment of birth. The war on fossil fuels that he supports, all of these radical policies, he held his feet to the fire on that. And then he paired it, Martha, with a very strong, proactive, affirmative case for the Trump-Vance ticket by pointing to President Trump's extraordinary record of success in his first term of delivering a booming economy, an enforced border, law and order, and world peace. Peace through strength globally. And he said, look, he's got a track record. You don't have to guess what President Trump is going to do in a second term because you have a 4-year record right in front of you. We're going to do all of that and more in a second term. So it gave voters a compelling reason to vote for Trump-Vance rather than just against Harris-Walz.
So what do you say to the swing voter that would say that, inflation is going down now, the jobs reports are good, interest rates are starting to go down, that this is all a part of the things that were put in place at the beginning of the Biden-Harris term? Because they're out there. You've talked to them. I talked to them. What would you say to that person?
Well, I would say if you take a look at the last 3.5, now going on 4 years, you see a much different picture. And you've actually seen the truth of Kamala Harris's record. So when President Trump left office in January of 2021, Martha, the economy was rebounding in a really strong way after the unprecedented crisis and lockdowns of COVID. We had about 6.5% economic growth, and we had inflation at 1.4%, which was a steady number throughout his presidency. Donald Trump had a Goldilocks economy of robust economic growth, little to no inflation, and unemployment at or near historic lows for every demographic group, including African Americans, Latinos, women, Americans with disabilities, veterans. So he delivered a booming economy through a pro-growth economic agenda without delivering big inflation. Also, when he left, gas was about $2 a gallon. This was an incredibly steady record of economic success for 4 years, and it wasn't a mystery. He did it through tax cuts, regulatory relief, unleashing our great energy sector, and striking fairer trade deals with trading partners like China, Mexico, Canada, Japan, South Korea, and others to protect America's workers. So he had a consistent record of economic success. He enforced the border. He essentially solved the illegal immigration problem in this country. He effected law and order. And then, of course, he had no new hot wars, and we're bringing our troops home. Over the last 3.5 going on 4 years, Biden and Harris threw all of that into reverse. And the American people have been suffering in an extraordinary degree because of their failed policies. And if we had Kamala Harris as president, to any undecided voter, all you have to do is look at what is happening in your home state of Georgia, neighboring states of North Carolina and Tennessee and Florida. The federal government under Kamala Harris is nowhere to be found. There is no more money left for Americans in crisis who are literally drowning to death all across the Southeast because Kamala Harris and their team put America last. So the question you need to ask yourself going into voting is, do you want this catastrophe of America and Americans last, or do you want the proactive America First agenda of Donald Trump and J.D. Vance? I think the answer is pretty clear.
We're talking to Monica Crowley, and, I got to know Monica a lot better through my relationship with Alan Combs, who's the very famous liberal talk show host, and he was married to Monica's sister. He passed too soon. He was just a great guy, had wonderful manners. That's the thing I always remember about Alan, is that he had fantastic manners. But how's your sister doing?
Well, thank you so much for the question, Martha. That's very kind and sweet of you. My sister is doing well.
Good.
It's been tough because they had a lovely marriage, a very strong relationship. And Alan, you are exactly right. He was such a class act. We disagreed on pretty much everything politically, and we vowed when we were together as a family never to talk about politics. So Christmas, Thanksgiving, we never.
Well, and it's funny. I remember
so lovely.
I remember asking him the question, why is it liberal talk shows are not as successful as conservative? And he was one of the more successful ones. I mean, he had a really strong following. And he said, well, Martha, it's two things. He says, one, we don't have a sense of humor. And two, when you're bashing capitalism all the time, you can't get sponsors. So I was just like... And I tell you, I've used that story many times. But anyway, Monica Crowley, and it goes to show, Crowley, it goes to show we can all get along and we can talk about the issues. We appreciate you very much, and thank you so much.
My pleasure, Martha. Thank you.
To hear the full versions of last week's Martha Zoller shows, go to the podcast page at accesswdun.com, and you can follow me on social media at Martha Zoller.